Hello, this lecture is on the Suez Crisis. After the War of Independence of 1948, Israeli leaders focused on increasing the population by immigration and modernizing the armed forces. In addition to the ongoing guerrilla attacks by the Egyptians, Jordanians, Syrians, Israel had to deal with Egypt's purchase of weapons from the communist bloc and Soviet misinformation that said Israel consistently waged a hostile policy against its neighbors. Because of Arab bitterness over Israel, there was a constant danger of a new outbreak of war. War came in 1956. In 1951, Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion told his cabinet, "It is the Arab interest to erase all trace of the Jews from Israel. This is our terrifying problem. Today, designers of Arab policy are willing to make peace with us only if we transfer to Madagascar or elsewhere and forfeit the land." End of quote. Syria was Israel's most implacable enemy, but Egypt was the most dangerous given its large population and the intense hostility toward Israel by both secular and religious leaders. When King Farouk's regime ended due to a coup in the summer of 1952, the accession of Gamal Abdel Nasser to power in April 1954 suggested more difficulties for Israel. On November 11th, 1954, the press reported Nasser's position on Israel that, quote, "Nobody can force the Arabs to accept peace with Israel or to recognize her as an established state. We believe that we can reverse the position in Palestine to its natural state and return the land to its people and owners." A pressing issue for Israel was Egypt's continued refusal to allow Israeli vessels in the Suez Canal. Israel did not have good relations with Britain, but the British presence at the Suez Canal zone was preferable to Egypt having complete control of the canal. One notable Egyptian act was the seizure of the Israeli merchant ship Bat Galam and the torture of its crew when it attempted passage through the Suez Canal in September 1954. Preferring the presence of British soldiers at the Suez Canal, the Israelis worried about the eventual planned British withdrawal from the canal that would transfer the canal to Egypt. Israel also experienced many problems with the Jordanians who ruled the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. The Israelis held secret meetings with the Jordanians at least until the summer of 1951, before a Muslim assassinated Jordan's King Abdullah outside the Al-Aqsa Mosque in East Jerusalem. And it was due to his failure to support Palestinian objectives. On the prospects of Jordanian-Israeli talks, Ben-Gurion declared, "With the removal of the Abdullah factor, the whole matter was finished." The number of Israelis killed from West Bank raids ranged from 44 to 56 in each of the years of 1951, 1952, 1953. But after Israel's adoption of the punitive retaliatory policy, the number of deaths fell to 34 in 1954 and 23 in 1955. Ben-Gurion declared, "Our blood is not dispensable. There is no other way than by sharp, aggressive reprisal without harming women and children to prevent Jews from being murdered by our enemies on the outside." End of quote. Reprisals appeared to boost the morale of Israelis living in the border area and placated those demanding revenge. Behind much of the Arab hostility was the militant position of various Muslim leaders who called for Islamic unity against Israel. Meeting in Jerusalem in December 1953, an Islamic Congress for the Palestine question declared that peace negotiations with Israel represented a treasonous act. In 1955, Radio Cairo proclaimed, "The day of Israel's destruction is coming closer. This is our resolve. This is our faith. There will be no peace on the borders, for we demand revenge, and revenge means death to Israel." Egypt viewed Israeli citizens as fair game, and the Egyptian army began training and assisting Palestinian refugees as fidayeen, those who sacrifice themselves. And they were trained to attack civilian targets. Special bonuses went to those who successfully killed either armed or unarmed Jews. Egyptian politician Hassan el-Bakari explained the rationale of the Egyptian government promoting this strategy. Quote, "There is no reason why the fidayeen, filled with hatred of their enemies, should not penetrate deeply into Israel and turn the lives of his people into hell." End of quote. Responding to repeated raids from Gaza, Israeli forces attacked Egypt's Gaza headquarters in late February 1955, resulting in almost 40 Egyptian deaths. Codename Operation Black Arrow, the devastating Gaza raid was the work of two paratroop companies led by Ariel Sharon. Although some argue that Operation Black Arrow caused Nasser to change his policy toward Israel from accommodation to confrontation, others contend Nasser long desired war with Israel because, quote, "there could be no room in a Nazarist Middle East for a non-Arab state." In the wake of the uproar over the Gaza attack, Nasser improved his military, a project assisted by the Soviets, who provided an impressive quantity and quality of modern weapons through a Czechoslovakia-Egypt deal. Nasser's soothing words of peace gained traction with some naive Westerners, but others saw him as a habitual liar. To the Knesset in November 1955, Ben-Gurion spoke lengthily on Israel's security. The Arabs oppose more than Israeli territory and independence. Quote, "Their plan, as many of them state frankly, is to throw us all into the sea. Let us not forget that during World War II, the majority of Arab rulers admired Hitler and looked forward to his victory." End of quote. The disadvantages for Israel were obvious. The American government prohibited any sale of arms to Israel. The Egyptians were stronger with their acquisition of arms from the communists, and they had troops stationed in the Gaza Strip not far from Tel Aviv. Israel also had to be more vigilant of Syria due to a new mutual defense agreement between the Egyptians and Syrians that placed their troops under a single command. In February 1956, Egyptian officers stationed throughout the Gaza Strip received a top secret field order concerning the unavoidable war with Israel. The supreme objective of the Egyptian troops was to see Israel's complete destruction, done quickly and, quote, brutally and cruelly as possible, end of quote. In response to the Egyptian firing of mortar shells at Israeli settlements, an Israeli major ordered a heavy rain of mortar fire on the town of Gaza that killed over 50 Arabs. Among the approximate 100 wounded were women and children. The Israeli leaders received word that the Fedayeen would enter Israel from Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon on a mission of vengeance for the bombardment of Gaza. There was a large-scale operation, but the entry point was only from Egypt. What followed was the Fedayeen killing of unarmed Israelis, including 5 school children at prayer near Ramallah. Meanwhile, there was no progress on allowing Israel freedom of navigation at the Suez Canal and at the Gulf of Aqaba. Israeli anxiety rose when Egypt in May 1956 received $250 million worth in arms from the Soviets, including 200 jet fighters and bombers, 100 heavy tanks, boats, submarines, and heavy artillery. More problematic, however, was that the arms deal signified that for the first time, a major power aligned itself with an Arab state against Israel. Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal Company on July 26, taking over the British and French-owned firm. Both Britain and France viewed this development as a serious economic threat. As for Israeli leaders, they understood how Nasser's bold action against the British and French raised his prestige in the Arab world. During the 1956 summer and fall months, there was a rise of violence along Israel's border. Ben-Gurion adopted a more aggressive position on the issue of war. On October 17th in the Knesset, he argued that it made sense to carry the war to the other side and defend ourselves through offensive shock tactics. 6 days later in Paris, at a preliminary meeting with the French, Ben-Gurion explained it was vital for Israel to destroy the Egyptian military bases in the Sinai and the Gaza Strip because they represented the staging area for a major Egyptian assault. In a meeting later in the day with both the French and the British, Ben-Gurion and General Moshe Dayan agreed with their proposal to dislodge the Egyptians from their control of the Suez Canal. While Israel, Britain, and France plotted in secrecy without informing the Americans, the Arabs made plans to work together to take military action against Israel. On October 27th, the official publication of the Egyptian military government wrote of the establishment of a unified command of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, viewed as a, quote, supreme effort to tighten the death noose, end of quote. More troubling news for Israeli leaders was the possibility of the Soviets sending volunteers to fight with the Egyptians. Following the elaborate collusion scheme with the French and British, Israel struck first with a paratrooper drop 45 miles east of the Suez Canal on October 29, followed by an offensive by land into the Sinai. The Israelis scored key military victories in early November that resulted in their control of the Sinai. As secretly planned, these developments supposedly forced the British and French to issue an ultimatum on October 30th for both the Egyptian and Israeli troops to withdraw from the Suez Canal. As expected, Nasser ignored the ultimatum, and the British and French, as planned, bombed Egypt and landed their paratroopers to regain control of the canal. The complicated military operation against Egypt was a military success, but a diplomatic disaster because President Dwight Eisenhower, responded with anger, demanding Britain and France exit from the canal and Israel withdraw to the armistice lines. The president feared that the crisis would drive Arab states into Soviet dependency. Israeli leaders remained bitter that the Americans and the United Nations pressured them to withdraw from the Sinai, the Gaza Strip, and Sharm el-Sheikh. The United Nations Emergency Force oversaw the ceasefire and withdrawal, but it lacked authority to prevent any future Egyptian military mobilization of the Sinai. Israeli leaders had little confidence in vague UN promises of maintaining order and preventing the Egyptians from using the territories for hostile acts once again, on Israel. With Soviet interference complicating matters, the Americans, British, and French saw no viable solutions to improve Arab-Israeli relations. Nasser looked to another day to complete unfinished business. Thank you.